The tithe issue has become a bone of contention among Seventh-day Adventists, with the idea being propagated that because of the corruption or even apostasies that we see in the General Conference structure, it wouldn't be wise for one to send their tithe there. But is that biblical? Does it mean that when you pay your tithe to the General Conference for it to be used to support ministers who may be in apostasy, does that mean that God will hold you accountable for their sins? Recently, Professor Walter Vaith and Martin Smith from Clash of Minds made a video that I agree with largely. Have a look.
Martin, there are people that say, the church is making such a poor job of things, let's remove the tithes and offerings from them.
Blackmail them with it.
So the movement of destiny needs a change of leadership. It needs a change of organization. All right, what about tithes and offerings? They must not be withheld by givers, even if they are not in harmony with what the conference does. Martin, can that be true? Let's read this. You have been withholding your means from the cause of God. Read the book of Malachi and see what is spoken there in regard to tithes and offerings. Cannot you see that it is not best under any circumstances to withhold your tithes and offerings because you are not in harmony with everything your brethren do? The tithes and offerings are not the property of any man, but are to be used in doing certain work for God. Unworthy ministers may receive some of the means thus raised, but dare anyone because of this withhold from the treasury and brave the curse of God? Interesting statement. The early pioneers, they didn't have money. They generated their own money. They worked in the fields. They sweated. They were doing building projects. They were working as blacksmiths. They were trying to make money to stay alive. And then how would they be to be full-time pastors? So then the systematic benevolence was introduced, and eventually the tithe question was studied, and it was assumed, was this only for the Old Testament? And then they studied the New Testament and saw, that this was still the process. And so God introduced that system into the church. In the time of Eli,
Oh, that's so important.
were people paying tithes to the conference, although they were misappropriating it?
So Eli was part of the Levites and he was the high priest.
Yes.
So that's where the tithe had to go to.
And his sons, did they disappropriate the tithe?
Completely. And that they were an apostasy.
Exactly. They were worse than in apostasy, right?
Were the people allowed to withhold their tithes?
Okay, who's the first one to go in an apostate system if you withhold the tithe? The good guys, right?
Exactly.
They're the first ones. The pain in the neck, according to them. He has to go. All right. So I dare not. I pay my tithe gladly and freely, saying, as did David, of thine own have we given thee. A selfish withholding from God will tend to poverty in our own souls. Act your part, my brethren and sisters. God loves you. He stands at the helm. If the conference business is not managed according to the order of the Lord, that is the sin of the erring ones. The Lord will not hold you responsible for it, but there are people that say that.
That's exactly what the problem now is. People are saying that if you know that where you give your tithe to a conference and they are in apostasy or there's apostasy in that conference, you are going to be held accountable.
All right. Are there very strict rules as to how tithe money may be used?
Yes.
You're part of the committees. There are very strict rules, right?
Yeah, I was on the executive committee for a very long time and I saw that.
All right. Now, is it possible to misappropriate those funds?
Yes, they can if they really want to, but it's going to be investigated.
Okay. So there are very strict rules and you can misappropriate them.
But then you'll have to have a corrupt person to do that.
So who's responsible for the corruption then? That person? Or do you become responsible? So, if you do what you can to correct the evil. The Lord will not hold you responsible for it if you do what you can to correct the evil. But do not commit sin yourselves by withholding from God his own property. Cursed be he that doeth the work of the Lord negligently or deceitfully.
But what if one is impressed or convicted to give his tithe to a cause that, though not in the general conference structure per se, but is doing also a work that qualifies to be supported by tithe? Will it be sin to give tithe to such a cause? Let's listen to the words of Pastor Randy Skit, which I also largely agree with.
Is it okay for someone or even a local church to decide to redirect their tithe from a conference to a different line of evangelism?
The church is an organized body. Remove organization and you have disorganization. Remove organization, you have chaos. The church is a reflection of heaven, because the church on earth and the church in heaven are supposed to be one, but we must obey God as verily as the church above obeys God. We have this system of tithing. The Seventh-day Adventist Church has a system. The tithe is returned to the church. The same way the widow brought her mite to the temple, despite the fact Jesus knew the temple was run by corrupt priests. He commended her for bringing her tithe to the church, because the tithe is really given to God, not to the conference president or the executive secretary or the local church pastor. It's given to God. We must avoid the scenario in which every man does what is right in his own eyes, as was the custom in the book of Judges. And so our policy as a church is to bring the tithe to the storehouse. The storehouse is the church. Now, I cannot say that God will not convict an individual to act differently on particular occasions. I cannot deny that. But if you think God has convicted you to give it to some organization, don't tell anyone. Because if you tell someone, you may spread an activity that by spreading becomes a problem. If you alone did it, no problem, because you feel so powerfully convicted. But if you spread the news around that I'm doing this and I'm doing that, simply because you want to let the church know the church can't tell you what to do, we love to be rebellious, then you've created a problem. Return your tithe to the church. If you decide to give it to some ministry, do not tell anyone.
So feel freely to pay your tithe, not worrying about the apostasy, because it is not your guilt, but you are giving it to the Lord. And if you are impressed to give to the irregular lines or ministries not along the general conference, do so as you are convicted, for inspiration is not against it. Thank you, and may God bless you. Goodbye.